We all know the mantra, don't we? The universal prescription for unhappiness: you must love yourself first. You've tried the affirmations, the self-care rituals, the books, you've put in the work. Yet, that heavy, unforgiving feeling of inadequacy remains. You feel like a fraud, constantly battling an inner critic that never shuts up. What if I told you that this popular self-help advice is fundamentally flawed? What if the idea that you must become perfectly whole in isolation is actually a lie that keeps you trapped, struggling, and unworthy of the very connection you crave? Today, we are not looking for platitudes. We are cutting through the commercialized noise to find the brutal, necessary truth. We're going deep into the psychology of why loving yourself is genuinely much harder than loving others. How your deepest sense of worth is just a conditioned echo of the past. And why the solution isn't forcing self-love. It is something far more profound. Abiding in awareness. If you've ever felt stuck in the loop of self-loathing, pay attention, because we are about to rewire the foundation of your self-worth. Have you ever wondered why you can offer a stranger who makes a mistake endless grace, patience, and understanding, yet you hold a lifelong, unforgiving grudge against the person staring back at you in the mirror? It is the great paradox of our modern existence. We are more than capable of the deepest empathy for the world, yet we are often our own most consistent and brutal enemies. We have been told for years that the answer is self-love, a term that has become so diluted and commercialized that it feels more like a chore than a cure. But why is it that despite the books, the affirmations, and the spa days, that heavy feeling of inadequacy remains? The truth is, loving yourself is genuinely much harder than loving others, because you aren't just dealing with a lack of affection. You are dealing with a deeply ingrained psychological architecture designed for survival, not necessarily for happiness. Think about that voice in your head after a minor mistake at work. The one that doesn't just say you made an error, but whispers that you should probably quit your job and hide away forever. We often mistake this voice for our conscience or our truth. But in reality, this harsh internal critic is a learned, distorted form of self-protection. Somewhere along the way, your brain decided that if it criticized you first, it could shield you from the pain of others doing it later. You've been living in a defensive crouch for so long that you've forgotten what it feels like to stand tall. We treat self-loathing as a character flaw, but from a psychological perspective, it is often an understandable response to life's circumstances, a protective layer of armor that has become too heavy to carry. The irony is that this armor, meant to keep us safe, is actually what's keeping us stuck. We are trapped in a cycle where we believe that if we are just hard enough on ourselves, we will finally become good enough to deserve our own love. But you cannot hate yourself into a version of yourself that you love. It is scientifically and spiritually impossible to grow in an environment of constant shame. We need to stop looking at self-love as a destination we arrive at once we've fixed all our flaws, and start seeing it as the very foundation required to even begin the work of healing. If you are struggling today, if you feel like that gap between who you are and who you want to be is an unbridgeable canyon, realize that the bridge isn't built of self-improvement, but of self-compassion. The weight you are carrying isn't your identity. It's just a habit of the mind that you've been taught to mistake for your soul. It is time to stop being the prosecutor in your own life and start being the witness. Because the moment you stop fighting yourself is the moment you finally have the energy to grow. Your internal critic is not your master. It is simply a confused protector that doesn't realize the war is over. Before we can move forward, we must accept this radical truth. You are not broken for finding it hard to love yourself. You are simply human, carrying a map that was drawn by someone else's hands. Refuse to let a distorted past dictate the worth of your present, because your value was never something you had to earn. It was something you were born with. Now, let's turn our attention to the great self-help mantra of our time. You must love yourself before you can love anyone else. It sounds empowering. It feels morally right. But I want to challenge this notion as an intellectually honest, yet psychologically damaging oversimplification. This cliché has done more harm than good for people who are genuinely struggling, because it essentially tells them they are fundamentally broken and must fix themselves in isolation before they are worthy of connection. It places a massive, often impossible burden on the shoulders of someone already weighed down by self-doubt. Think about the unintended message it sends until you achieve this abstract, perfect state of self-love. You are ineligible for deep, meaningful, human connection. But here is the profound psychological truth. We are not solo projects. The total human being is inherently a social being. Our deepest sense of self-worth is not something we spontaneously generate in a vacuum. It is socially learned. It's not an independent entity, but a conditioned echo of our earliest relationships. An internal gauge that calibrated itself based on how the world responded to us. When the self-help movement pushes us toward total isolation, suggesting we go away and find ourselves entirely alone, it misses the essential point. Total isolation is not healing. For most people, it is psychologically fracturing. It starves the very engine of self-worth. In reality, self-love often develops through relationship. We learn what we are worthy of, what is acceptable, and how to set boundaries by first observing how others treat us, and crucially, by seeing the reflection of ourselves in the compassionate eyes of a supportive friend or partner. This reflection is not a validation of our flaws, but a mirror that shows us our inherent value, something our own internal critic has been actively trying to hide. The idea that you must achieve self-love first is a dangerous myth because it suggests that your love is conditional. It implies that if you have scars, if you have doubts, or if you had a painful past, you are locked out of true connection until you've scrubbed your soul clean. But love, true love, is meant to be a process, a safe space to grow together, not a final reward for perfection. In fact, many people who are insecure or have low self-worth learn to love others deeply as a way of seeking that worth externally. And while this strategy is unsustainable in the long term, it proves that the capacity for deep love for another exists, even when the self-love meter is on empty. So the question is not whether you are capable of love, but whether you are choosing to accept it. The journey is not to become completely self-sufficient and detached from the need for others. That is a path to loneliness, not to enlightenment. The journey is to recognize that your self-worth is not a static score that you must improve It is a dynamic state that is conditioned, molded, and healed within the context of safe, secure connection. Your self-worth is less about what you generate and more about what you accept. You don't have to earn your right to be a human in community. The right was granted at birth. The only thing standing in your way is the persistent belief that you must be whole before you are allowed to connect. The truth is, connection is what makes you whole. So if our self-worth is not self-generated, but is instead a conditioned echo, where exactly does that echo come from? The simplest way to understand this is to realize that the way you talk to yourself today, that inner dialogue, that running commentary of critique or encouragement, is often just an echo of the way you were talked to in your most formative years. It is the residue of your earliest connections. This is where the profound insights of modern psychology, specifically attachment theory, give us the map to our own hearts. Think of your early relationships with caregivers, not just as moments, but as the foundational wiring of your entire operating system. The consistency, availability, and emotional tone of those first interactions created the lens through which you now view all relationships, including the one with yourself. Now, let me make this highly complex idea immediately relatable. There are different attachment echoes, and they sound like this in your head. If you have an avoidant echo, your self-love narrative is a fierce independence that sounds like, I don't need anyone. I am completely fine alone. This voice protects you by pushing people away and dismissing the need for intimacy. But it is actually keeping you from true connection. If you have an anxious echo, your self-love narrative is one of relentless performance. I need constant validation to feel safe, and I must earn love every single day. This keeps you people-pleasing, constantly working to avoid the abandonment you fear. These are not flaws. They are deeply rational strategies your younger self invented to survive a confusing world. The core vulnerability factor here is that insecure attachment styles, the avoidant and the anxious, create a chronic low self-worth that is ready to be exploited. When your wiring tells you that you are fundamentally unworthy, you become an unconscious magnet for people who will prove that belief to be true. You are more vulnerable to abuse, manipulation, and most frequently, self-sabotage, because you are unconsciously attracted to partners who replay the familiar, painful script of your childhood. You mistake intensity for intimacy, volatility for passion, and control for care, because that is what was wired into your foundation as normal. The anxious person struggles with boundaries because saying no feels like risking their entire security. The avoidant person struggles with vulnerability because letting someone in feels like risking their entire freedom. The great liberation lies in understanding this. You are not your wiring. That echo is not the voice of your soul. It is the lingering sound of a past that has already concluded. You can't simply wish it away, but you can, and you must, start to distinguish the echo from the original sound. Stop allowing the unresolved scripts of yesterday to dictate the worthiness of your relationships. Today, your worthiness is not a negotiable term. It is the truth of your existence. And it is time to stop letting a conditioned defense mechanism sabotage the love you were built to receive. So, what does this conditioned echo of low self-worth look like in your adult life? It doesn't just stay in your head. It walks into your relationships, sits down at the table, and starts making the decisions. The most immediate manifestation is the poor boundary trap. When you don't believe you are worthy of respect, you will tolerate mistreatment, not because you are weak, but because you are operating under the internalized belief that this is all you deserve. Low self-love transforms into martyrdom, where you overgive, you over-sacrifice, and you accept less than the bare minimum, all in the desperate hope that your generosity will somehow, finally, make you lovable. But this only attracts people who are ready to take, not to love. You become a giver with a massive, unacknowledged deficit, seeking external validation to soothe internal pain. And this cycle is the death knell of true intimacy. This brings us to the core intellectual distinction, the pivotal moment where self-help gets it fundamentally wrong. We must distinguish between self-appeasement and true self-love. I want you to visualize two internal figures. The first is the indulgent parent. This is self-appeasement. It's avoidance and indulgence. The quick fix, it tells you, you had a bad day. You deserve to binge watch until 3 a.m., eat the entire pint of ice cream, and put off that important task. It feels like love, but it is actually an act of avoiding your true feelings, numbing the pain instead of healing the wound. The indulgent parent gives you everything you want now, but leaves your future self in a state of chaos and debt. Now, meet the second figure, the wise coach. This is true self-love. It says, you had a bad day, but because I love you, we are going to get 8 hours of sleep. We are going to stick to the boundary you set, and we are going to meditate for 10 minutes. The wise coach offers care, structure, discipline, and sometimes the tough love that prepares you for your future self. True self-love is not a feeling. It is a dedicated, consistent action. It's choosing the hard right over the easy wrong because you value your future integrity. If your current self-love practice looks more like appeasement than care, you are simply reinforcing the avoidance that keeps the loathing in place. And this internal dynamic is made worse by the self-negotiation bias. This is the cognitive distortion of self-loathing, actively filtering reality. Your internal critic is constantly looking for evidence to prove its existing narrative. Here is how it operates. In real time, when a friend cancels plans, the loathing bias doesn't think they are busy. It immediately screams, they don't like me. This proves I am unlovable. When a colleague gives you neutral feedback, the bias registers it as veiled criticism. The loathing is actively filtering out compliments and amplifying perceived slights, making it genuinely impossible to force self-love because your brain is distorting every positive signal. You are negotiating against yourself, seeing rejection in signals that are neutral or even positive. The battle is not with the world, but with the lens through which you are choosing to see it. It is time to retire the indulgent parent and let the wise coach take over, because only discipline rooted in care can finally override a lifetime of conditioned doubt. Now, we arrive at the turning point, the fusion of modern psychology and ancient mindfulness that finally offers a true path forward, one that doesn't demand you force a feeling you don't have. We have established that the problem is not a lack of effort, but a mind conditioned to loathe itself, filtering reality through a lens of self-rejection. If the problem is in the mind's conditioning, the solution must lie in awareness. The path to healing is not about forcing self-love, but about creating space between you and the voice that tells you that you are unworthy. This is the profound practice of abiding in awareness. Ancient wisdom teaches us that you are not your thoughts, nor are you your feelings. You are the awareness that observes them. Self-loathing, at its core, is a mental event, an emotional habit. It is a visitor that has been allowed to stay for a very long time. The key is to stop trying to argue with this visitor, because arguing with a conditioned thought only feeds it more energy. Instead, we adopt the posture of the witness. We simply observe the thought without identifying with it. This is the most powerful psychological hack you can ever learn. It immediately breaks the cycle of identification. Here is the practical technique, the simple prompt that creates this essential space. The next time that inner critic screams, "You are a failure," I want you to silently or gently whisper this phrase: "I am noticing a thought that I am a failure." Notice the immediate distance this creates. You are no longer the failure. You are the observer, noticing the thought of being a failure. The thought exists, yes, but you are not it. Self-loathing exists in the mind as a narrative, but it does not exist as your true, whole self. Your true self is the awareness that is watching the narrative unfold. This is the difference between being lost in the storm and standing on the shore, watching the storm pass by. By abiding in awareness, you stop negotiating with the biased filter and simply observe its operation. You recognize the anxious echo or the avoidant echo as an old, outdated script, not as a reflection of the present reality. You are finally able to see the self-negotiation bias in action, observing your mind actively seeking evidence of rejection and saying, "Ah, there is my old filter at work again." This gentle, non-judgmental observation is the truest act of self-love, because it allows the truth of your inherent worthiness to finally emerge from beneath the rubble of conditioned negativity. The final realization is this: you are not responsible for the first negative thought that pops into your head, but you are 100% responsible for whether you choose to believe it. True liberation does not come from defeating the self-loathing. It comes from disidentifying from it. You do not need to force love. You just need to stop identifying with the voice that insists you are not enough. Your path to self-worth begins not with a fight, but with a simple daily observation. The only step you have to take is to notice your visitor and say, "Thank you for sharing, but you are not me."